Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast. Many of you have been with me on this journey for some time, but if you're just finding the podcast, welcome. I'm excited to have you here. Each episode, we dive deep into a topic that intersects with shame and explore how that comes to be, the impact shame has on us as a whole, and in that area of our life specifically, and what we can do about it. This week, I'm super excited to be hosting a dear friend, Tina Hallis, who's nothing short of inspiring and warm. From the moment I first met her, she made me feel seen. And if you haven't checked out my video on YouTube on the power of the weekly meeting, I give her a huge shout out on there, as she's the person that helped spark Jordan and I 10 plus years ago to find a system to connect weekly and really show up in all aspects of our partnership. And while Tina and I are not here today to talk about weekly meetings and communication with our partners, I'm sure how we talk and when we talk to our loved ones is going to be a part of the conversation, because today we're talking about our health and well-being. Particularly, we're talking about chronic health and disease. From the internal stories we carry and shame we experience, the fear of judgment and pity from others, cultural norms and beliefs that make it hard for people to talk openly about their health experience, and the effects of being an educator or leader in a field where the pressure and pain is even greater to try and make people do the things that we think they should do to protect or address their own health issues. We're going to try to tackle little bits of it all. But before we do that, I want to share a little bit more with you about Tina. Tina Hallis has her Ph.D. and worked for over 20 years in biotechnology before discovering positive psychology in 2011. She was immediately drawn to the research and work and soon found herself changing gears to focus her career in the field of positive psychology. She was certified in it through the WholeBeing Institute, as well as trained in positive intelligence and as an authorized partner for Everything DISC, where they support clients with organizational restructuring or resolving systemic cultural changes. In addition, she's worked in conjunction with the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health as a Metabolic Terrain Patient Advocate, something I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about today in the episode. Tina, when I think about the trajectory of your career, I'm always fascinated. It feels like there's such an overlap of your skills that I can see when I kind of look at the map from above. And yet there's so many different aspects and sort of lives within your life, particularly when we think about your professional journey. So I'm really excited as we talk today and kind of think about our topic to watch the intersection of those different layers of yourself kind of come together. But before we do that, hi, welcome. I'm excited you're here. I have been buzzing all morning. I'm super excited.
Me too. Yes, I'm been looking forward to this, and I'm so glad we reconnected.
I know. I think one of the beauties for me, and I've wanted to do a podcast for, 7-8 years. And when I would always have this list of these are the people I'd want to talk to. These are the people I'd want to connect with. And it's been so cool because of, in the course of time and in the pandemic and as life happens, we lose touch with people in different ways. When I moved across the country, the connections I had with people really changed. But it's been so cool, whether it's you and I reconnecting. I recently just recorded an episode with somebody I hadn't spoken to in 13 years. We were best friends in high school and sort of lost touch over the years and then reconnected. And we just had this powerful conversation. And both of us were like, oh my gosh, we're right back in the high school art room with that same sense of safety that we had then. And so, yeah, it's been a whirlwind of an experience. And yeah, I'm reminded still when I was thinking about that first moment of meeting you and that retreat that we went to with Darcy Loma. It was just like a calming solidity. I don't think that's the right word, but a solid stance. You were just this person that I immediately felt rooted when I was around. And so it's super pumped. I'm super pumped to have this conversation with you because this is one that I think is a really important one and can be hard to talk about. I love to start every episode just doing kind of a feelings check and just getting a pace for kind of where we're at in the room. So if you could describe how you feel right now, just considering everything in life or just this podcast, What's one word you would use to describe it?
I would choose the word anticipating.
Ooh, I like it. And I like the ending. What's that? The grammar part where you made it a verb versus I think it's always a verb. I don't really know, but anticipating. So sort of that bated breath feel is what I got when you said it.
Yes, exactly. Looking forward to, and also just and excited and enthused while also just wondering, like, where is this going to go?
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious for you because when we circled back, like you were on my list of, I want to talk to you, but I hadn't had this. This is exactly what we want to talk about. I just knew I wanted to explore a topic with you. So I'm curious for you, what made this topic, this focus, something that you wanted to bring to the table and have a discussion around, particularly in the context of thinking about chronic health and disease and shame?
Wow. Okay. To make it a short story, otherwise it could be the entire podcast of me telling you that. I would say, as you mentioned, I discovered positive psychology in 2011 and have been living, breathing, teaching it. But then about 3-4 years ago, I discovered this metabolic approach to health, metabolic approach to cancer, and have been just obsessed and immersing myself in that. And then finding there's overlap, that the positive psychology piece actually plays a very important role in our health, in any chronic disease. And so I've been taking more training in this metabolic approach to health. As you mentioned, I'm now a patient advocate and working with this Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health. And honestly, as a scientist, I come into this like, I want data, I want labs, I want information. And the biggest aha I've had as I've been going through this and learning this, and then even sort of being an advocate for friends and family going through different things, the biggest thing I've learned is that it's about holding space and grace for other people to let them be authentic about their feelings of what they're going through, because our feelings and our mental and emotional space is probably more important in our healing journey than any labs or supplements or treatment protocols. And that my scientist part does not like that.
Well, I think your scientist part aligns with the majority of the US and probably kind of the culture as a whole, because it's hard to quantify that. It's that same, my former landlord and good friend of mine is going through her own process right now with a cancer diagnosis. And one of the things she talked about when she first got diagnosed and was sharing this with people was, oh, think about this white light, or, oh, do this, like all these kind of, this very like a woo-woo kind of feel. And as a mental health therapist, I'm aware that I'm out of the lab where you were. I'm a little bit more in that front, but even I'm like, come on, like there's like, what's the path? How do we talk about this? What's the research going to tell me if I do this, things will be better? And so the thing I think we struggle with as a culture is we're very emotionally distant. Talking about our emotions is something we still struggle with, regardless of how much training we have. And there's no clear roadmap of how that makes a difference. So it feels made up. It feels like me being 35 and someone saying, well, if you do yoga every day for 10 minutes, it's going to make a difference when you're 70. Well, but 35-year-old me has a 3-year-old and shit to do. So that's really hard to step into that and see that. So was that something that you had, like almost a skepticism of it or a resistance to it? Because it's like, this feels like you're just telling me something that doesn't really mean much. It's just like giving me a sticker that says things will get better.
Oh yeah, you nailed it right there. And it's my analytical part was totally resistant. And again, I think like you say, as a society, we are doers. Give me something tangible, explain it. I need to understand it. It has to make sense. And honestly, what I'm excited about as a scientist is now there's more and more studies and data showing how much our mental and emotional well-being is related to our healing journey in chronic disease. And so my scientist part really appreciates that. And yet on the woo-woo side of things, I guess that's the word I would have used before too,
Yep.
is now maybe, I don't know if this will make sense to the listeners, but this has been a huge aha thing for me. And that is recognizing that my head and my heart don't always agree on what they believe or how they want to approach something. And there will be times when my heart will like totally get something and my head is like, sounds a little woo woo to me. And so what I've come to tell myself is that it's okay if my head and my heart don't agree. I don't even have to choose. My head doesn't have to choose to believe something. It can just be open to the possibility. It can just be curious and not decide. And that was a huge shift. Like if someone's like, you can't say you really believe that. It's like, I don't have to choose whether I believe it or not. I can just be open to it. That was a huge shift.
I think two things in what you said that came up for me was one, sort of I've always had kind of a resistance when you think about whole self-healing and the work in the therapy room. I'm always like kind of skirting around the spiritual and soulful aspect of things. I think part of it is resistance to religion and my experiences growing up with it. But if I'm being honest, we all know religion and spirituality are different things. And so with the spirituality piece, it's like, well, I don't know how to make sense of it, so I don't know how to talk about it. And I think that's kind of what you're describing is this element of, now my 3-year-old asking about what happened when my grandma died and where is she and trying to make sense of it. And different people she asks, they all have different beliefs. And so she's been introduced to a variety of different belief systems. And when she's asked me like, well, so where is grandma? I'm like, baby, I don't know. And I have had to learn to find peace with that, to decide that not knowing is okay, but I'm allowed to explore the comfort in assuming she is somewhere, because again, science brain, well, she died, she was cremated, like her soul's gone, the physical being, like I can see that makes sense to me. There's some sort of evolutionary thing, like where do all the other animals go when something happens? Where are the dinosaurs? Like all these questions. And then you go, gosh, I just don't have to have answers for that. And that's scary. And the second thing that came up with that, so I'm curious how this pops up for you, is I think we're such a culture of defense and proving, even if you think about, bigger things that don't connect with this, whether it's politics and that kind of stuff, but it's like, well, prove it on whichever side you stand for. Like, this is what I believe and I have to have it. And I'm going to stick to this no matter what. And I'm going to only find proof that matches this. There's a real fear. I mean, at least for me, but I think for probably a lot of people listening in the world as a whole, of just being in a zone of saying, I don't know the right answer, because immediately that makes us vulnerable. Immediately that means you aren't the smartest person in the room. You don't know what you're talking about. And that's a really scary place. And I think ultimately, sort of the goal of a higher power and spirituality in any level, but many of us really struggle to exist in that space.
Oh, I think that's so true. And it's interesting when I start looking a little bit at the history, which I'm not much of a history buff, so it's not something I'm into. But when I start looking at the history of how, when science really started to take hold of our society and our way of thinking, and how, again, the pendulum swung so far from like kind of more the voodoo, the gods are in charge of, everything, to no, science. Everything has to be proven. It has to be understood. And there can be no in between. I think, again, it's like we need a little more balance in our lives. And for me, one of the things that has sort of helped that too is the one thing I can say probably with the most certainty out of anything that I believe, spiritual or around that realm, is that as human beings, we have limited capacity to understand with our human brains, to sense with our human, senses, and that just because we're limited and confined to this human body doesn't mean that there aren't other things to be sensed or other things to be understood. So I feel like the one thing I totally believe, that as being human, we are limited in what we can understand and what we can sense. And so I kind of have to say, well, then there's going to be stuff I can't understand or that I can't know. And I have to, like you say, find peace with that and accept that. But I remember when my daughter was little and I was trying so hard to be Lutheran. I was brought up Lutheran and I'm going to a Lutheran church. And my daughter must be in Sunday school, right? That's like just what you got to do. And so I'm teaching Sunday school. And so I don't know how old she was. I feel like she was still in a child seat. So I don't know, maybe 4 or 5. And anyway, here we are. It's after church. We're going to stop at the store. And suddenly she says, Mom, she goes, what's with this, whatever the sermon was about? I don't remember more. And I'm like, and she goes, do you believe that? She goes, I think that's a bunch of, whatever her.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking at her going, I can't defend it because I don't believe it either. And yet that's what we were just told. And suddenly it was like, wow, I think she's way smarter than me in that. Why am I trying to force myself down this narrow belief system? Because really there's so many more options of what we can choose, of what resonates with us, than being confined to a specific religion per se, right? A specific dogma. And I know there will some people who will be offended by that, and I get it. And if your religion works for you and you love it, more power to you.
Well, and I think too, what you just said that's really key is we see it. I think religion and spirituality is always a great example, but I see it, if we come back to the healthcare setting, even it's like, well, so what's like, my mom is very much, I grew up, and she's like this with Everly, where it's like, oh, you have a scratchy throat, you need this medicine. Oh, you could have had, there's a little snot in there. Like, she still struggles to believe that if your snot is like a yellow green, it doesn't actually mean anything specific. And so I grew up in I was over medicated, like that. I am Western medicine. This is what works. This is the answer. And I've seen this now from the mental health side, where it's like, well, this is the medication you take for anxiety. This is the medication you take for your bipolar disorder. This is the thing here. This is just what it means to have bipolar disorder. So you can't do anything to change it. There's no reframing. There's no skills. Like, take the meds, do this. At least you're no longer using crack cocaine. Like, there are these sort of the ways where, when that is the train of belief system you've sort of been given, it's similar to you being like, gosh, I tried so hard. And I did the same thing. Jordan and I, when we first moved in together, we kept exploring churches. We're like, we got to do this. I got to figure out, I got to learn, this is what you're supposed to do. And what I think is a really humbling experience is to go, that just might not be the only way. And that is, I think, the part that's really hard is, so my mom's right. There are times, Ev and I both got a cold 6-7 weeks ago that turned into a sinus infection, like a secondary bacterial infection. We both needed antibiotics. That was a necessary time that we needed to do it when we're, going in 4 or 5 weeks and we're still can't sleep and it's getting worse and she's getting an ear infection. Like, yes. But like, when she's teething and she's just got a little bit of pain, but she's sleeping fine and she's got a little snot, like, she doesn't need anything. She's okay. It's okay for us to teach her, other ways to deal with that. And so I'm curious for you. I'm kind of coming into, even pre you as the scientist, you as the positive psychologist, you as kind of finding the Metabolic Terrain Institute. What was the train you were on with health? And kind of what were you taught? And then how did you navigate your way to getting to this point, which seems maybe very far from where you started too?
Oh gosh, yes. It feels like I'm on a totally different planet. I would say that if the me from, say, even, I'm going to say 10 or 15 years ago met the me today, I would be like, oh man, she is so weird. She's like an alien from another planet, right? And it's interesting because right now, when I, like the people I've trained with in this metabolic approach, we just got back, we did a retreat in Atlanta together, and we're like, we get each other. We eat the same, we think the same, we approach health the same. It's because otherwise when you're out with your normal friends or family, you feel like an outsider because nobody eats like you eat unless they're on a healing journey in a similar way. And it's interesting because when I was growing up, probably very much like you, and even now, I know, like my parents, like, oh, you got a scratchy throat? Oh, you still have some antibiotics left over?
Yeah.
It's like, or, just using ibuprofen at the first sign of a headache or a pain of any kind, or maybe preemptive just in case you did something that might hurt later, I'm not realizing those are mitochondrial poisons. Those are actually hurting your body and getting in the way of it healing. Or, oh, you got a little bit of a fever and you kind of don't feel the best. Well, just take some more Tylenol or ibuprofen or go to the doctor. And it's funny how, honestly, I think when I discovered Dr. Nasha Winters and the metabolic approach to cancer, her book, it was part of a journey I was on because I had been told that I was now diabetic and I needed to be on medicine the rest of my life for my type 2 diabetes. And this was at the age of, let's see if I can do the math. I'm going to say right around the age of 50 or a little over. And I remember thinking, I don't want to be on a medicine the rest of my life. I'm going to go do more research, dig into the literature, figure out what is the most current science and understanding around this stuff. And my doctor was so mad at me. Just take the medicine. Your diet's already good. There's nothing you can do. I'm like, I'm going to go see what I can do. And honestly, when I started looking, I was so grateful that with my science background, for me to just dig into the science, even though it's a field that I'm not trained in per se, it's easier for me to, I think, understand it and dissect it. Because just because a headline in the news says, saturated fats cause heart attacks or increases your chance of heart disease, I'm grateful I can go back in and look at the study and be like, oh, well, you know what? That's not really what they found at all. That wasn't even their conclusion or whatever. But when I looked at the science, honestly, it flipped my world upside down because all the stuff I thought I was doing to be healthy and to keep my family healthy, it was like the opposite of what the current science was saying. And that's when I learned that it takes 17 to 20 some years before the latest science gets incorporated into the current medical policies. Whoa. And so there's a gap from what they say from bench to bedside. So your research bench to your bedside by your doctor is decades sometimes for policies to change. And, and if you have a very serious condition like cancer, you don't have time for your doctor to get caught up, much less your doctor doesn't have time to stay up on all this latest research. So it's been a whirlwind of every belief I have being challenged. And so honestly, in a way, it has really opened me up to being more questioning of my beliefs than probably ever before in my life.
Well, two things I wrote down as you were talking to. So first, I've never heard the bench to bedside gap, which is just crazy. I mean, it makes sense. And when I go back to and think about, especially working in the eating disorder field, is you grew up being told butter was fine or it was bad. And then it flipped and, apples are good. Well, now too many apples are bad. Stevia was good. It was the one health, no aspartame. Stevia is great though. It's natural. Recent studies now showing it's not so good. And so it's like all these things where I don't know if this is your experience, but one of the things I think about, and especially with Jordan being an emergency medicine physician, I think he's sort of at the peak of it, where we're so deconditioned to feel distress. Physical, that's that pop the ibuprofen before it gets too bad, or because I may or may not feel bad later. I even think about going out drinking with your friends. Instead of saying, maybe have one drink and be done, it's, well, I'm going to drink 3 or 4 drinks, eat food my body doesn't normally like, or it doesn't have very often. So it's going to have a hard time digesting it. But then I'm just going to pop some ibuprofen so I don't feel bad the next day. We sort of have this indoctrinated in us. On top of that, we have such a pressure on the medical system to give us an answer right away. We're so, I don't even know, impatient, but that's not even the word I'm looking for, where it's, well, I want the answer now. What do you mean I have to wait 6 weeks for another test? What do you mean? And I felt that. I remember having this pain and I went down this rabbit hole where suddenly it was, well, your gallbladder is not functioning. Your gallbladder needs to come out. And I was having all these HIDA scans come back saying that. I met with the surgeon. I'm like, just get it out. I want it out. This is the problem. I'm in pain every day. I can't eat. Get this out of my body. And she's like, yeah, you're 24. And I don't think that's what's happening. I'm pretty sure I could take this out. And there's at least a 50% chance that you're still going to have this pain because there's so many other factors we haven't even explored yet. And I think as someone that was facing a lot of judgment, having a history of an eating disorder, so there were so many assumptions of like, well, you're just probably still engaging in behaviors, even though I wasn't. Lack of trust in the system, people just sort of giving me those quick answers. I was like, I don't want to meet with a dietitian every week to talk about my diet. I don't want to talk to a GI specialist. I don't want to try these other things. Like, what do you mean probiotics and yoga and mental health? Like, that's dumb. That's dumb. I don't want to do that. So there's this, like, I want the answer. I'm obviously going way deeper now into this, but like, if I really think about the psychological elements, I think it connects back to this. Our job is output. So you need to get anything fixed to get back in line to keep producing, work the job, do the, have something to show for your value. And I think that's fallen now onto the healthcare system of fix me now. And they even joke when Jordan was in residency, the attendings would say, well, the residents are probably the go-to on that because they're the ones that have to do all the research. They're the ones in it learning. Like, we don't have the time for it because we've got, 40 people boarding plus a waiting room of 70 plus people, and we don't have a system that's designed for this. And nobody is interested in the answer being, well, this might be a you thing. You're, come in and fix it. I'm still smoking. I'm still eating a certain way, instead of I'm going to look into smoking cessation programs, or I need to, follow a regimented diet. And so there's this piece again, I think of, so I guess to sum it up, we want quick fixes. We want those quick fixes to come medically. It's sometimes more convenient if it's a pill that we need to take versus a lifestyle change, because then there's shame in that. What does that say about me if I'm the one that eats this way? What does that say about me if I'm the one that has these behaviors or these addictions? And there's a motivation problem because we are so burnt out and overwhelmed. Now you want me to do the research on this thing that may or may not work when I don't even know that I've got the outcome, back to sort of the woo-woo-y piece. I feel like that is sort of the system we're stuck in. And you were able to break out of that to say, I don't like this. But I'm imagining the listeners stuck in that, maybe without the research background, without that sort of propensity for curiosity. What's waiting for them if they break out of that? What do they need? How do we give them that space to release from that pressure? I know it's a big question, but
well, it's funny. The first thing that comes up in my mind is, just like with psychology, right? How much pain does there have to be for you to put enough effort into change, right? What benefit can there be, or what pain or can you overcome by having to spend more time cooking or shopping differently or changing something, right? All of that takes energy and effort, and it's inconvenient, and we're already, overstressed with too much to do. And now you're asking me to do more. But if the payoff, especially, the problem, like you say, is it's not instantaneous. It's not like, right, oh, well, in a week, you're going to feel better. Well, I'd do almost anything for a week if I knew I'd feel better in a week, right? But for a lot of us, it's gradual. It might take months or longer because it's not like those styles and the way we've been eating. I mean, like even when you get cancer, I love, like Dr. Nasha says, there's very few times when the cancer that's now been detected and is causing symptoms just started a few days or weeks ago. Most of the time, cancer has been percolating in our body for years. In fact, like she says, some studies show now that the average person goes through 7 different cancering processes in their lifetime that they may never even know about it, right? Because our body is designed to heal and deal with it. But sometimes we're so stressed or overwhelmed or under nutrition that those systems break down, and then we get the symptoms and we get the diagnosis. But again, coming back to your question, like, how can you in your mind have the payoff and the benefit be bigger than the effort it's going to take to make a change? And for me, honestly, it's like sometimes I look around at family and friends with chronic illnesses or lifestyle issues that are just making their life more difficult. And I try to use them as inspiration for my own life. Like, I honestly, like today we went for a walk and I want to go backpacking later, but I know it's like, I'm 56 now and certain joints are starting to hurt. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to put on like a 10-pound fanny pack to just start helping me build some more resilience. And I am working so hard on different aspects of my health to manage inflammation in my body, because I definitely have some shoulder issues going on. I definitely think it's tied to inflammation. I think it's tied to digestion. I think it's, it's not just what you eat, it's also what you absorb, and all your body's systems that are involved in absorbing stuff, how well are they functioning? So I would tell listeners that, is it staying active? Is it feeling good? Is it, avoiding some of the pain and living conditions of some of your friends and family that you see struggling? What is it for you that can make it worth the effort?
Well, I think too, I wrote down, I love the idea of pain versus sort of energy and effort. And I think the thing is, we are sort of problem motivated people. We're reactive versus, I guess, preventative, but that's not even what I think of too. Just sort of, I teach on preemptive boundary setting. What would it be like if you set a boundary ahead of time? Like the boundary here. Okay, we're blocking an hour. That gives us a boundary so that when you come into this conversation, where we both know we could have this conversation go for 6 more hours and still not scratch the surface on everything, we've got a boundary in place so that there isn't the tension of like, oh my gosh, I have something else to do. How do I politely get off the call? And so and I struggle with this. I struggle with preemptive boundaries and preemptive response plans for a problem that hasn't happened yet. And I think it is really that reactive and production-driven culture. So it really gets rooted back into the normalized dysfunction. Let's not question the fact that we're asking people, particularly return to work, pre-post, whatever we want to call this layer of the pandemic phase, they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Well, just pick up takeout, order these pre-made things, do this stuff. It's so much easier, instead of saying, how did we get here where playing outside with your kid is inconvenient? And you want to have whatever you can to get food into your body as quickly as possible. And you're sort of chronically existing at a state of like, ugh, physically, mentally, emotionally. But we've normalized it. And so I think, for people listening to this, if it were me, my shame brain would go, damn it, this is one more way I'm getting it wrong. I'm not like, now I have to do this and I haven't figured it out. And I always swing the pendulum from perfection to 0. So I'm either I have to be the best or I suck. And so it's all right. And I did this in my eating disorder recovery for years. Like, tomorrow's the day. I'm never going to engage in a behavior again. I'm going to eat for my body. I'm going to listen to it. And then the next day I'd wake up, I'd get on the scale, some negative thought would come in, and I'm like down the rabbit hole in behaviors again. And so you have to, what you did right there is you broke it down to what's one change you might make? What is something that if we have to play with our shame, because the shame's in the sandbox with us right now, we know we're going to be motivated more by that reactivity. Okay. Well, if we're being honest with ourselves, there's got to be some aspects of how we're showing up to our lives. It doesn't feel great. And it might be our energy. It might be the constant waking up and feeling, like the body image distress. It might be feeling like when I go out, I feel pressured to eat or do things a certain way, or I feel the call to want to get up and move, but it hurts every time and I'm so overwhelmed by it. So then I end up on the couch. But finding that pain point and starting to lean into a little bit. You don't have to be the person that wakes up and does yoga at 5 a.m. and makes your own wheatgrass smoothie drink and does these things. Like, some people will do that. That's their lives. But we're talking about micro tweaks that can add up over time to really build systems changes. Well, we're also acknowledging that we still exist in a cultural system that is counter to the work at the Institute, the research that we're finding, because we're still existing in a system, bench to bedside, 17 to 20 years behind the systemic changes that have to happen for any of this to really be actualized.
Yeah. And you think about how because we are living such busy lives and we have such high expectations of how productive and effective we should be, that we put our self-care on the back burner. Everything is about convenience. Processed foods are at an all-time high because they are so convenient. Grab that protein bar instead of actually, cooking some food, because cooking takes time. Shopping takes time. Sure, you can get stuff delivered. My dear friend loves her Instacart. And I'm like, wow, this is so cool. I live somewhere where Instacart really wouldn't help me very much. But, the problem is, I think so much we let life and society determine the kind of life we live. We don't purposely design our own life in a way that fuels us and feeds us the right way. And it's not our fault, right? We shouldn't feel shame about it. It's the society we are basically born into.
Right.
But what I am learning and getting so excited about is we have more power and choices than we realize. If we could just, my hope is to really just inform people, empower people so that they can make more educated choices about what they eat, about their healthcare, about, when they don't feel good, what do they decide to do to try to help themselves? Because right now we have very limited choices and information around that. But I feel like the more we can learn and help people understand their choices, then, hey, maybe it's not right for you. Maybe you're like, no, you know what? I'm quite happy living my current convenient processed food lifestyle. I'm like, good for you. Just like whatever belief system resonates with you. But if you plant the seed, it may be 5 years, 10 years, you might be like, now I've got some pain or some issue or some chronic disease. Now I'm more motivated to go and learn. And that's where I really, even like with my diabetes, I honestly see it as a gift. I remember my mom going, oh, I'm so sorry you had to get that, because she's diabetic. And I'm like, no, honestly, I feel like it has given me the motivation and the inspiration to go and learn and change and be determined enough to really do things differently. And again, I'm not saying it's easy, right? It takes effort, but I'm learning we have so many more choices about things that really will make a difference in our long-term health, including our current health.
Well, I know one of the things that we were talking about offline was the idea of, when we get some sort of diagnosis, if it is going in and your doctor's like, yep, you have diabetes, you have cancer, there's the immediate, my life sucks. Everything, there's the panic, depending on what it is. I think, especially if you still hear the word cancer, regardless of what type of cancer it is, there's this, I'm going to die feel, and this sort of immediate greeting of your mortality in such a different way. And so there's that fear. There's that, what does this mean? There's the integration of this, my life is forever changed. And now that this word is associated with me, whatever it is. And then there's the shame of like, did I cause this? Did I do this? And obviously some diseases bring that more than others. Diabetes is a big one that I think there's a lot of societal judgment and internalized shame around. But you mentioned this idea of, one of the places that can be really scary and really negative for people is, we're already coming in with those sort of overworked, burnt out, maybe not doing the things that our body might be asking for, or our mind or our spiritual self, or all these layers, are sort of ignoring this in the pursuit of output. And then this thing happens, and then you can fall down a rabbit hole of, for some of us, it's the pity party. For some of us, it's the sort of apathy, the ambivalence to anything, the resolve that life is going to be terrible. What you just described, I know you used the term offline of post-traumatic, what was it? Post-traumatic growth? Post-traumatic, growth. And so tell me a bit about what that looks like for people, and also kind of demystifying that we're not just trying to like paint a turd gold. There is really a mindset reframe we can have. And this is sort of maybe that first step to getting to a point where down the road, maybe we are excited about this growth without having to have it preemptively triggered by pain and trauma.
Yeah, I think actually it was probably, 15 years ago or so when I first heard this term post-traumatic growth. And I learned that it's actually more common than post-traumatic stress disorder, but we just tend not to hear about it. If you undergo a trauma, the data I saw at the time was like 60% of the time, eventually, not immediately,
right,
that person will undergo post-traumatic growth, meaning that trauma in some way has helped them become stronger, better, more grateful, some positive aspect. Where about 40% of the time there's post-traumatic stress disorder, which means there's some sort of ongoing additional huge stress that interferes with their ability to function. And I'm sure you can define that way better than I can. But just this idea that there's even a possibility, much less a very likelihood, that going through this stressor could bring about a benefit, at least at some point. Yeah. And I have to tell you, with so many of the people I've been training with through this Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health, a lot of them have had or have a terminal or a stage 4 cancer diagnosis and have managed to overcome it, have managed to find a way to live with it, to navigate it. And so many of them will say, because of that, my body's cry for help, right? I mean, your body is constantly knocking at the door with symptoms and telling you, hey, I'm not doing the best here. I could really use a little attention. But eventually it reaches a point where it's like yelling at you. And that's maybe a major diagnosis of some kind. And in the moment, we might be overwhelmed and scared and freaked out. But if we can, find a point at which we can say, wow, this has really forced me to stop, reassess what's important to me, reassess how I care for myself, reassess what I'm grateful for. So many of these people now tell me how they are grateful for what they've been through and how they feel happier, healthier, more grateful than they ever did before. And that just like, okay, I don't want to have to go through a major diagnosis to reach that, right? So I'm saying, let's not wait for that. Let's tune into our bodies and care for these very precious and delicate, amazing, biological, extraordinary things that we have to get us out there to live our life. And whatever your belief system is, I think anybody would agree that if you just know a little bit about biology, our bodies are beyond a miracle.
Mm-hmm. Well, even, I think, and I know we're kind of right at our time, because there's this part of me that's like, oh my gosh, I want to go 12 more layers into this. I want to talk about the body keeps the score. I want to talk about all these layers of that, how for so many of us, when we get these diseases and diagnoses later in life, how much of that, if we were really able to track it and connect, is connected to intergenerational trauma, is connected to early childhood experiences, even just somebody looking at the adverse childhood experiences study to look at how our body responds to mental, emotional distress, insecure attachment, pain, trauma. So there's so much overlap in what's going on. And I think the gift that we can give ourselves is to not get stuck in what they talk about in AA or Alcoholics Anonymous as that terminal uniqueness. This, my story is worse than everybody else's. This won't work for me. This isn't helpful. I've tried this before. It won't work. It's the really coming in with the idea of, how can this help me? What can I learn? What am I willing to try? And that shift changes everything. And I laughed as I was thinking about this, because I'm tying it back to now again. I mean, things seem to come full circle back to me as a mom, but the two things that she and I are focusing on now, we tried we made something called muesli, and it's like grated apples and it's mixed with this yogurt and milk and granola and all this stuff. And you soak it overnight. So it's kind of like overnight oats, which she's had before, but it was a little different. And she came in saying that she wasn't going to like it. She wasn't going to have it. I said, okay. And we have our only ask at the table is that we all try a food. If you try it and you don't like it, cool. You don't have to eat it. There's other options. And she came in and she was like hesitating, eating it. That experience, anyone that's been around a little kid or an adult that is like nervous about a food and they do that. And then she starts eating it. And each time she starts taking a slightly bigger bite. And by the end of it, she likes it. And I said, can I ask you a question? And she said, yeah. And I said, did you come in telling yourself you weren't going to like it? So it was really hard to be open to the experience. And bless her, she's so honest to where she's like, I did, mama.
Wow.
Like, yeah. How often do we come into something thinking this isn't going to work for me? This isn't going to help. My story's too bad. This is too deep. And that's that piece of some of the people you're talking about. It doesn't mean that suddenly they're not maybe facing a terminal diagnosis. They might still be facing a terminal diagnosis, but the onus and the control they're taking over how they show up the rest of their lives and the ways that they embody a relationship with their body in the remainder of that time has shifted. And for many people, it is the changing to, all of us have a terminal relationship with our body, like it dies at some point. And so it is really thinking about how do we show up with that way of thinking, I want to enjoy every day that I have in this body. I want to, when I tell my daughter, you got to get up and go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, take care of your body, show it love. I don't want to have to work so hard to remind myself I deserve to get to do those things too. And maybe now it's not brushing my teeth and going to the bathroom, but take 10 minutes and prepare a snack that you're really excited about instead of going for this other thing, or listening to your body when it says, gosh, you're not okay. There's too much happening in your life right now, and I need you to listen to me. We are not okay right now, and I need us to address this. Again, I think we're kind of leading people to the cliffhanger of we're going to have to do a follow-up episode at some point because there's so much more we can hit on. When you think about yourself listening to this, when you think about somebody else finding this, what is that, if they could take one nugget, one piece, particularly in something that feels so overwhelming to all of us, what would you want them to hold? What's the one thing to take with them to kind of help them in that next step of this process?
I think about the things I've learned and where I'm currently at with how I eat and how I live. And certain things I was even doing today, I'm like, ooh, Dr. Nasha wouldn't approve of this, right? But it's like, it's a journey, right? It's especially if you don't have a serious, critical, chronic disease right now that demands urgency. I've been on this journey now for probably 4 or 5 years. And, it's baby steps, change this. And then you get used to that for a while and change another thing and just keep working on that process. And I think about, I put a lot of resources on my website. I recommend Dr. Nasha's book. I think there's so many places we can go. And then it's like, don't get overwhelmed. Just pick something that seems like low-hanging fruit for you. Oh, that would be easier for me to do. I could do that 1 or 2 things. Start there and then just, keep thinking about it and think about, well, what might be the next thing? And when does it feel right to add that?
Yeah. Well, I think not going for the Band-Aids, like the ibuprofen, the quick fix, and also recognizing that, I think going back to what you said before, that we have the right to make choices independent of what the world around us is telling us, that embody what's best for us. And so in your case, you found this program, you found the work of Dr. Nasha to be so helpful and to be really kind of pivotal in you changing the way you're thinking about things. But even that piece where it's like, oh, well, she wouldn't approve of this. Then you have to release that and go, but she's not the owner of my life and body. I am. Am I okay with this for now? Is this a part of where I am in my journey and my iterative nature to get to where I want to go? And if I'm not, how do I show that part of me that made this choice or did this thing love and grace, and then make a decision about how I want to move forward? And I think whether this is with chronic health, with anything, you're really hitting on that piece of just life is an iterative process of showing ourselves grace and moving forward with curiosity. And so really embodying that in everything we do. So I'm curious now, we started with anticipating. As we wrap for today, what is one word to describe how you're feeling now?
I am very enthused. I'm just, based on everything we've talked about and all of that, I'm just like, yes, enthusiastic. Let's, keep spreading the word and just empowering and educating people so that they know they have more choices, I think, than they realize.
Yeah. And again, I think coming back to what you said too, of give yourself grace. I think the two words, that bench to bedside, is what's really sticking with me. And it's just like giving myself permission to know that things are changing and evolving all the time. And every day I'm doing the best I can with so many things that I don't even understand how the systems are coming together. And so the flip I want to work on is going back to that other part you said about, I don't want my life to be dictated by pain. I don't want it to be dictated by reactivity. And so how do I find drive and motivation by things that aren't suffering based? And how do I shift to that? And so listeners, there's so much here. I will make sure that you have all the information to connect with Tina. I'm going to put the episode that I did or the YouTube video on terminal uniqueness if you want to learn more about that. Also to learn about the weekly meeting, which again, totally separate topic and still something where there's so much power in the things that Tina has to teach and to share with the world. And I think one of the things I love most about you, Tina, is that you are someone that's so open to saying, I don't have the answers. I am constantly learning. That is me as the scientist. I'm not claiming to be the end all be all. I'm claiming to be a learner and a person that's willing to try different things on and to be open to that evolution. And so I think for all of us, take a little bit of that from Tina. Allow yourselves to be learners. Allow yourselves to be in this process. Learn about your body, learn about your life, be open to it. And really that one chunk at a time is how we're all going to be combating our shame and moving into that space of shame resilience. So thank you all for joining. Remember, share this episode with someone you think would love to hear it or could benefit from it. Hit that like and subscribe. And if you're on your favorite podcast site, leave us a review. Let us know what you think and what more you want to hear from us. We will see you again next week.